Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for a couple of minutes. It is 25 after, so we'll start in about 5 minutes. So just hopefully you have those sheets printed off and you are ready to go. There we go. I'm a little in the dark here for some reason. Not sure why. Hey, looking forward to that good stay. Excellent. Can we wave at that person? Oh, I bet you we can. Put user in timeout. Add moderator. Well, it looks like just you and I tonight, Donna.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can turn and talk to you.
Somebody's coming.
Oh, yeah, there's some voices. Oh, I hear voices, so that's good. Hi, Myrtle.
Oh, hi, Myrtle.
Oh, air conditioning just kicked in.
There you are. Hi,
The-
you're a small crab.
The air, you got your hair done.
On Saturday already.
Oh, not too bad. I'm doing pretty good. Only 3 days late. That's not bad.
So grab a paper and a pen.
Okay.
We have homework today.
Well, it just helps us focus. Do you want to hand me a pen too, Donna?
Oh, yeah, I'll help pass that down there. Do you have to do it
Thank
ahead
you,
of
Donna.
time, or we're gonna wait?
Can we read it? Joyce's
Oh,
homework?
yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure if I can get on. Trying to tell me all new things. I will try to send that link.
Wow, there's a lot of papers. Wait, both sides.
Well, I'll save paper a little bit.
Bought any plans today, Daniel?
He did
Yesterday, and I
Okay,
checked
okay.
this morning.
Yeah, it won't feel too bad.
Yeah.
Is that how it comes, eh?
Yes. Yeah. It's like some kind of drinking bubble.
Oh, yeah. Michelle. Oh yeah, Michelle sent a picture. There.
Let's see what the percentage is. 80%.
Oh, okay. So that'll kill. Well,
Made by Minhas
Is
Distillery.
that the same as what they have in the grocery store?
This is higher. Oh, I don't know if it's the same stuff.
Because I thought that was 70.
Let's see what this
Oh,
stuff is that
I think they
bought.
like they want 80%, like as far as
Yeah.
This is
that's from the grocery store.
This I bought at the drugstore a
Oh,
while
yeah.
ago, and this is 62%.
Oh, wow.
okay.
I know.
I thought it
that-
had to be 60.
I know at IGA it's more than that.
Oh, okay.
It's either 70 or 80. I just
Ah,
can't remember
nice.
because I bought some
This is
beer
good.
bottle. I
Okay.
mean, I think the bottles still were smaller
Yeah, probably.
because,
This is 750 mils.
yeah, I think this one looks bigger.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, those are quite expensive. Like when you actually,
Okay.
yeah, like when you can figure what he charges for the small ones.
$8.
Yeah, so I bet you that's a $20 bottle
Mhm.
or more. Dylan wanted the empty bottle,
How many did he give us?
a case.
Like, yeah, there's lots.
So at least there's
We've got,
at least
like,
12 or
Couple of
14.
years probably, if
Yeah,
not more. Yeah,
We've got lots.
yes.
That's fantastic. This
No, that was
is
very
good
kind,
on
very,
there
very
then.
kind.
Thank you to him.
Yeah.
That is good.
Right, good. We've got Kay joined us and
Oh,
Michelle's
good.
with us, so that's good. All right. Okay, it is 7:30, so we will begin. And I'm not sure why I'm in the dark on this side, so maybe I'll move this. Hang on. Yeah, that's probably better. One more twitch.
That's
There.
tiny.
I think that works.
Oh, yeah.
What's that choice?
The way you can adjust it.
Yeah, it's very slick. That way it's kind of handy and out of the way.
That's right.
Well, this is our last study in this series. So what we began, I think we must have began this together, then got separated, and then joined up again. I think we've
Yes.
gone full circle on this one. So
That's right.
it is beautiful in here. The air conditioning's on, so that's a nice feeling on a night like tonight. So I may be the least qualified person to teach this material tonight, and actually probably this side of the table should be teaching me, because we're going to look at the portrait of women in Proverbs. Yes, because there was some healthy contention over between individuals, and not contention, just
No,
good-natured
Chatter,
joshing.
yes.
Yes,
fun and
yeah,
Funnin', that's right.
and funnin', good-natured funnin'.
Good-natured
So
funnin'.
I took it seriously. But I thought it was worth focusing on that issue, because it certainly is. And it's funny because Mandy, Ralph, and I were talking about this as well. I asked her about the nature of women in Proverbs, and which was originally like a 12-second conversation, turned into quite a bit longer because Mandy's so well versed in this material. So I'll tell you a funny story that I was at a Filipino potluck in Winnipeg one time, and I was with Pastor Fred, who's the Filipino. And of course, there's a bit of an accent, not much of a language barrier. And I was waiting in line. He said, "Oh, in the Philippines, we men go first." And I thought he said "we," W-E space men, M-E. I said, "I love this. We men get to go first." And he said, "Yes, we men get to go first." I love this. We men. He said, "Women, women." We men, but with his accent, it came out we men. So I totally misunderstood Filipino culture, because I thought men got to go first at potlucks, but apparently women go first at potlucks. So that's about the entire extent of my, maybe not entire extent, but one of the examples of me bumping into the relationship between men and women, and sometimes how it works and sometimes how it doesn't. So, all right. So if you have your sheets in front of you, what I did was I first started off, I printed out all the verses to wife and all the verses to women in Proverbs. Now, there's only 14 verses of wife and 17 verses of women. So take that in front of you, and let's go through them. And there's a plus or a minus below that. So if you look at each verse, it says the verse and then a plus or a minus. What I'd like you to do is circle whether it's a positive endorsement of women saying good things, or what could be perceived as a negative. So, we've talked about the contentious woman like a dripping tap. That would be maybe not the best portrait of a woman. So Well, maybe we'll do these together. We've got some time tonight. So may your fountain be blessed and may you rejoice with the wife of your youth. What would you put that one as? Yeah, absolutely. You know, she's the wife of your youth. She's blessed you with her presence. All right. Why, my son, be intoxicated with another man's wife? Why embrace the bosom of a wayward woman? Is the wayward woman a positive or negative? Yeah, I'd say it's probably a negative description of the wayward. That image of the wayward woman, right, comes up. Keeping you from your neighbor's wife for the smooth talk of the wayward woman. Another negative, you bet. For a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life. Negative, yeah. This whole idea of men being vulnerable to the seduction of women is definitely a portrait in Proverbs. The portrait of the seductive woman and the vulnerable young man. So he who sleeps with another man's wife, no one who touches her will go unpunished. That's tricky. What do you think, negative or positive?
It's not really her fault.
No.
Well, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one who's doing it,
Yes.
but there's punishment for doing it. We could leave that one as is neither nor if you want.
I guess she's another man's wife. She shouldn't be with the guy.
No,
That's true, yeah.
Negative.
and the act is negative.
Yes, okay, we'll go with a negative on that one. A wife of noble character is her husband's crown, but a disgraceful wife is like decay in the bones.
Oh.
Hi, Harlan, come on in. Grab a sheet there, Harlan. What do you think, negative or positive? Both, yeah, it's one of each, right? That's one of those proverbs that sets things off in balance. It says, you know, the noble wife is good, but the disgraceful wife. So a wife can disgrace. That little word disgrace, put a pin in that and pocket that in the back of your mind, because that idea is gonna be central to our summary. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. Positive, absolutely. A foolish child is a father's ruin, and a quarrelsome wife is like a constant dripping of a leaky roof. Negative, yeah. The idea of the quarrelsome wife.
Do you want to just tell Harlan?
So Harlan, we're looking through these verses and we're finding out, this is on Proverbs' portrait of what women are like. And we're just picking whether they're a good portrait or a bad portrait. We'll come to a conclusion here. So we're reading the verses and then circling a plus or a minus. If it's good, we're going to... What's that?
Before or after marriage.
A little bit of both sometimes in this chapter. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right, that's right.
Houses and wealth are inherited from parents, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. That's a positive. The idea of the prudent wife is the gift. All right, so now just before we go to the next page, just count up on each page. It'll make it easier for later on. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 negatives, and 1, 2, 3, 4 positives. So 4 pluses and 6 minuses. It'll just make it easier when we score the whole thing. All right, the next page, 29:1. Better to live on the corner of a roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife.
Yeah, well,
Women are quarrelsome, yes. Better to live in a desert than a quarrelsome and nagging wife. It's almost like a double negative, isn't it? Yeah, quarrelsome and nagging. For an adulterous woman
a
is,
double negative make it positive.
yeah, it would, yeah, you're right. 2 negatives, yeah. For an adulterous woman is a deep pit, and the wayward wife is a narrow well. That's negative, right?
Yes.
That's, in other words, she's faithless. And I like the idea of the deep pit, but the wife is like you're trapped in the well. It's even worse yet, you know. It's one thing to fall into a pit. It's another thing to be trapped inside a well. So it's even worse. Another double negative, so to speak. Better to live on the corner of a roof than share a house with a quarrelsome. Didn't we just read that somewhere? We did, and it's repeated.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then a quarrelsome wife is like a dripping of a leaky roof in a rainstorm. It's another negative. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 and 6 makes 10 negatives and 4 positives. So far, now we could say that if you subtracted the ones that repeat themselves, it's not as bad. Because if you look, it's
I guess because there should only be 1 negative.
for
There should
all,
only be 4, or
Yeah.
you only counted 4.
because quarrelsome is 1, 2, 3 of them are 3, 4. 4 of them are all quarrelsome. It's the same problem.
Yeah.
So the biggest issue he has right now is what? With women, with wives. Arguing, right? An argumentative house. But we'll leave it at that because we counted all the positives. So, all right, so that's all the verses about wives until we get to Proverbs 31. All right, so that's page 1. We got a 4 and a 10.
Well, really, it's only half the positives to the negatives.
Yes, so far.
Oh, we're not done.
Oh, no. Now that's just done the wife section. So now we'll take the 17 verses that talk about women. All right. And the same thing, we'll do the same scoring thing. Wisdom will save you from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words. So the two issues that Proverbs has with women are what? Quarrelsome.
Adultery.
And adultery or seductive, right? Okay, so really there's only two primary issues. Another negative. From the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey and her speech. Okay, there's that poor adulterous woman again. Why, my son, be intoxicated with another man's wife? Why embrace the bosom of the wayward woman? Keep you from your neighbor's wife, from the smooth talk of the wayward woman. They will keep you from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words. All right. Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like and with crafty intent.
Wow.
All right. So all of those verses, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all 6 are really one issue, right? Adultery. So we can kind of chalk them all up to one negative portrait.
Stuart says everything they do and everything they say.
Oh, ouch.
It's negative. I hope not.
We'll get to some other verses from Sirach yet. Hang on, Stuart. All right, Proverbs 9:13. Folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. Negative. So this is the unruly woman. Now, here we go, finally. A kind-hearted woman gains honor, and a ruthless man but ruthless men gain only wealth. So that's
I mean, the woman, a kind-hearted woman. That's
is
what I was
positive.
focusing
Yeah.
on.
kind-hearted. Like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion. So would you qualify that as negative or positive?
Negative.
Yeah. The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands, the foolish one tears hers down. One of each, right?
Yes.
The wise and the foolish woman. Okay, so that's a lot of negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on that page, 9 negatives and only 2 positives. We're doing great. Proverbs 22:14. The mouth of the adulterous woman is a deep pit. A man who's under the Lord's wrath falls into it. That's an interesting idea. Another negative. 23:27. For the adulterous woman is a deep pit, and the wayward wife. We read that verse before, but it just repeats it because this is the verses about women. So we don't count that one. We've already got that one on the scoreboard. 30:19. The way of the eagle in the sky. This is the things he doesn't understand. The way of the snake in the rock, the way of the ship on the high seas, and the way of a man with a.
Young woman.
So is that positive or negative?
I think it could be positive.
Yeah, it's love and
Eagle in the
romance.
sky is amazing.
Yeah, the way of the, yeah, that's beautiful. So I'd go with a positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
30:20, the way of the adulterous woman, she eats and wipes her mouth and says, I've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
30:23, a contemptible woman who gets married. So that's another negative. And 31:30, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. All right, so
That's positive.
that's positive. You betcha. 1, 2, 3 more negatives on that page, and 1, 2 positives. So total in this section, we've got 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 total minuses and 4 total positives. All right, let's just take a look at those before we move forward. What are the key areas that Proverbs has issues, Solomon has issues with when it comes to women?
The adultery
Adultery
and the arguing.
and arguing. Yeah, absolutely. Those are the 2 primary issues. Any other things you see? What are the positives that Proverbs sees for women then?
Yeah, fearing the Lord is.
Fear the Lord, yeah. Noble character.
Like an eagle in the sky.
Yeah, there's certain degree of mystery. I'll take that as a positive. Yeah, like an eagle in the sky.
A good wife, it's just.
Yeah, the good wife.
Good wife, yeah.
The kind-hearted woman.
Mhm.
Any other positives? She's wise in 14:1. Any other positives that you see? Rejoicing in the wife of your youth, just the general idea of a wife and
Right.
in general is a positive idea. All right.
Prudent, right.
Prudent,
Excellent.
excellent. Yeah. So if we start adding those up, if you get just the principle of the wife, the wise woman, the prudent woman, the excellent woman, the kind-hearted, I'm going to number these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He gives 9 positives about women and only 2 negatives.
Okay.
And the biggest issue he has with women are adultery, the seductive woman, and the contentious woman. But all the others are painted in a positive light. Well, now we're tipping the scales to the positive. Let's take a look at chapter 31. It's kind of neat how this book works, because the book started out with who talking to who?
Father to his son.
Right, father to his son. And the book ends with a mother talking to her son. So it's a neat little bookend. The book begins with a father saying to his son, this is what you should do. And it ends with a mother talking to her son saying this. So it's really, it's beautifully structured.
Yeah.
Both parents, both giving their advice. It's fascinating, and we're not going to do it tonight, but to parallel or contrast what a father says to his son and what a mother says to her son. And I suspect as mothers, you have said different things to your children than your husbands said to your children. You know, perhaps you, and then of course there'd be overlap and complementary phrases as well. But you would bring your perspective to your children. So that would be a study, a study for another day to contrast the lessons that a mother teaches her son in contrast to the lessons a father teaches his son. So this is chapter 31 then. The words of King Lemuel, an oracle which his mother taught him. So this isn't Solomon anymore. What, O my son, and what, O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vows? That's an interesting beginning. Like, what am I going to say to you? Oi, is basically what's going on here. All right, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at her advice and see what he learned from his mother about women.
Can I just read
Yeah.
this commentary?
Yeah, go ahead.
From Stuart or Michelle, I'm not sure. Over the years, I've met many men who allow their wives to be, in quotes, head of the house. Those women have always been troublesome, confirming that men should be the head of the house.
The contentious wife.
The contentious
Yes, and
wife.
we're going to pick up that because this is a shame-based culture, and that the idea that the wife would bring shame to her husband is crucial to this conversation. All right, so in that first verse, would you say that's a positive or negative? How? I mean, it's kind of a bit of a stretch to find positive or negative, but it's positive.
I think it's positive because she's what's the word? Stressing her relationship with him. Like,
Yeah.
you're my son. Oh, son of my womb, son of my vows. You know,
Yeah.
the relationship is.
My son, my son.
Yeah, she's pointing out the relationship.
Yeah, and it's a king she's speaking to too, right? Yeah, so this is the queen mother.
Okay.
Do not give your strength to women, or your ways to which destroys kings. Now, that's tricky. Because what's she saying to him?
Is it one or the other?
It's
Or is it the
both.
same?
It's both very similar. Yeah. Because he's not singling out women or men, he's singling out a practice. And the practice will fault you with both women and ways which destroys kings, or ways that which destroy kings. It's what my guess is that he is saying to his son, don't get lost in women, because you can see that men do. You know, they spend their lives chasing women or ways that destroy kings. She wants her son to be a good king and not get cut. What was Solomon's biggest problem? He fell in with women. And Samson too, right? Samson gave his strength to women. And as a consequence, rather than giving his strength to the Lord, he ended up giving his strength to a woman. And so I don't think it's so much the issue with women, because it parallels with, or your ways to that which destroys king. She's saying, focus your energies. Your task is to be a good king. Don't get lost in chasing women, and don't get lost in chasing ways which destroys king. So I don't think the fault lies on the women here so much as the focus on. Does that make sense? Yeah. So would you give that a positive and negative, or you want to leave that one alone?
Yeah.
I don't know if it qualifies for a positive or a negative.
Yeah, because it doesn't tell a character of a
No.
woman.
Right. It's not
Because it could be even himself, like his own ways could be.
absolutely the ways that
Yeah.
destroy him.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't
So
necessarily
let's-
say it's the women.
Yeah, there's no characteristic of
Yeah.
women in this. Just that it's easy for us to get lost in the way. Because you could reverse it. Don't give your strength to men. If a woman, if you're saying this to your daughter, you could say, "Don't give your strength to men,"
Yes.
or ways which destroys queens. So I think it's neutral in that sense. All right, here we go. Oh, it is not for kings, O Lemuel. It's not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire strong drink, for they will drink and forget what is decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him whose life is bittered. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his trouble no more. Interesting little verse that gets quoted once in a while. This has nothing to do with men or women, right? This is just a command for kings not to get drunk because they will rule poorly. So there's no negative or positive on that one. Open your mouth for the mute and for the rights of all the unfortunate. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the afflicted and needy. Again, this isn't about men or women. All this is advice to a king, right? She's teaching her son how to be a king, that he is to speak for those who cannot speak. This is phenomenal. In this day and age, as we talk about rights and defending the rights and how are we as Christians supposed to respond to the rights of things, it's right here in front of us, right? That we speak for those who cannot speak. We defend the rights of the unfortunate. We judge righteously, and we defend the rights of the afflicted and needy. And this is wonderful counsel in this time. I'd say it's a plus, yeah.
Yes.
For the most part, yeah. All right, here we go. Now we're jumping into the wives. 10, an excellent wife. Who can find her? For her worth is far above jewels. That's a definite plus. She's excellent. She is of greater value than any jewels that you could find. Okay. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of his life. Definitely a plus. Yeah. He trusts her. And because of that, he can rest comfortably. She does him good all his life long. She looks for wool and flax, and works with her hands in delight. The positive. She's hardworking. Yeah, and I like that. Yeah, works with her hand in delight. She enjoys what she's doing.
She provides.
She provides exactly. Yeah, and she's out there looking for this, right, and joyfully working. Next, and I put the paragraphs in because the ideas are lumped together. So 14 to 19, the next idea. She is like merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She rises also while it is still night and takes the dog for a walk. No, I don't know. Gives food to her household, portions to her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength, makes her arms strong. She senses her gain is good. Her lamp does not go out at night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, to the poor, and in her hands grasps the spindle.
She's not lazy.
She is
Not
not
at
lazy at all. And what is she? She's strong.
Very ambitious.
She's ambitious.
Yeah.
She's diligent. This is a beautiful portrait of the strong, hardworking, diligent, smart. She buys a vineyard. She's this is like if we could throw more pluses down in that single paragraph, right? As we think about women's portraits in this book, this is the crowning portrait, because we start to see that, yes, maybe the issue of adultery and argumentative was burdensome or taxing, but this chapter just redeems this whole book, because this is the true portrait of the woman, the wise woman. I love that she's strong. She brings food, she plants, she looks, her husband trusts her. And then he picks it up in 20. She extends her hand to the poor and she stretches out her hands to the needy. She is benevolent, not just her own family she cares for, but who else?
Those are beyond her family.
Those are beyond. She extends her grace is like branches of a tree that extends and covers her community. And those who are poor and needy know that they can go to her to be looked after. This is a beautiful portrait.
I'm always surprised because I always assumed that in this time in culture,
Mhm.
that women didn't have the authority to go and purchase a field or
Right.
plant a vineyard. Like, they obviously were given more
Then we think we are, yeah.
responsibility and authority than we think.
Yeah, we often paint them in a very submissive role,
Yeah.
but that's not the case here. And it's interesting when you study it later, much later, Roman culture, it's all very under the table. Men appeared to be in control, but it was women who did so much of this. She is not afraid of snow for her household. For all her household are clothed with scarlet, the richest of clothing. She makes coverings for herself, and her clothing is fine linen and purple. Another positive, right? Her children aren't afraid of going out in the cold. Why? They're clothed, and not just clothed, they're clothed beautifully. It's extravagant. And as a consequence, 23, her husband is known in the gates where he sits among the elders in the land. Why is he known among the gates? Because of her, right? She is hard work. They go, oh, you're a successful man. What do we always say? Behind every
Great man is a woman.
is a woman. Exactly. That's where this image comes from. He may be sitting at the gates. The reason he can sit is because she's busy working. Yeah, exactly. He sits amongst the elders, and she's been working since verse 11.
Or light.
Before that, she's been working in the dark.
Really puts the light out at night.
But yeah, I know
Yeah.
how many hours sleep does she get?
This is a high standard, isn't it?
Yeah, her lamp does not go out at
Oh my
night.
goodness.
Exactly. She is,
Superwoman.
this
who
woman
can
is-
measure up.
yeah. 24, she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies the belts so she also works with leather. She belts to tradesmen. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. She is so well equipped. She's not afraid of the future. And interesting how what is one thing he's never described about her yet?
Her appearance?
Her appearance. Because what's she clothed in? Strength and dignity.
Mhm.
While her children are clothed in purple and scarlet and fine linen, her clothing are strength and dignity.
Mhm.
So he describes the physical appearance of her children, how they're clothed, but she is, the inner qualities of strength. And this image of this strong, hardworking, dignified woman, and you can feel the nobility of her.
Mhm.
Like, this is an impressive woman.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Stuart, just wondering, is this the description of an elder?
Well, it's the queen mom. The queen mom's talking to her son and saying, "This is the woman you want."
Okay.
He says, "Son, this is the kind of woman you want." Yeah, because that's verse 10. An excellent wife. Remember, she's talking to her son.
Okay.
An excellent wife who can find.
Great.
Because he maybe hasn't found it. So he's saying, look, son, you need to find an excellent wife. Well, what's an excellent wife look like? This is the criteria. Here's the problem. If this was the daughter-in-law, and the mom said, "Son, if you're going to get married, you better marry this woman," what pressure is on that poor girl?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the negative side of it, right? She
Oh,
comes,
Sorry, the man at the gates is Stuart is wondering if that's
Oh.
the elders, I guess?
I think, yes, that would be the elders. Exactly, Stuart. Yeah. He sits among the elders at the gates.
Okay.
He has reached a level where he is sitting one
So
of
he's
those.
an elder then?
Yeah, the husband, well, he's the king, right?
Oh,
So,
yeah, of course.
Verse 26, what does she do? When she does open her mouth,
Wisdom.
right. And what's that in contrast with? The woman who opens her mouth,
Oh, contentious.
the contentious
Awesome,
woman, yeah, versus the adulterous woman with her seductive words, or the contentious woman with her conflicting words. This woman, when she opens her mouth, what happens? Wisdom comes up,
Kindness, yeah.
and the teachings of kindness is on her tongue. She is such a contrast to any other thing that we've seen in the book so far. 27, that's another positive, by the way. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of.
Idleness.
She is hard. The hardworking is the virtue of this woman.
No kidding.
She says, "Honey, if you're going to marry a woman, make sure you marry someone who can work hard." And then, as a consequence, her children rise up and bless her. Her husband also, he praises her. Her husband says, "I get to sit at the gates." It's like he says, "You are Many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. You know? She's beyond noble. Now, here's the last little part. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. Is he worried about her appearance, or is she telling her son to consider her appearance? No,
Not really, no.
no. He says beauty is vain. You know, charm is deceitful. That which what might initially attract you to him will, you know, be her charm and her beauty. She says to her son, don't worry about that stuff. Don't worry about her beauty. Don't worry about her charm. He says, what you want is what? The woman who fears the Lord.
Mhm.
Yeah. And this is her advice to her son. She says, son, don't worry if she's beautiful. Don't worry if she's charming. You want a woman who fears the Lord. Because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Yeah, wisdom and righteousness, right? She wants her son to marry a godly woman.
Mhm.
Yeah. What can any of us ask?
Right.
Yeah. And then the whole book wraps up with a single phrase. Give her the product of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. You know, her hard work. All right, now just for fun, add up the positives in this chapter. How many did you count?
16.
16? Yeah, 16 positives. Yeah. So if we actually look at Proverbs, what we see is what are the two primary issues that Proverbs has as it paints a portrait of women? Contentious and adulterous. In other words, not faithful or seductive. The adulteress would be unfaithful in her marriage, but also this idea of a certain degree of physical seduction over men, and then somewhat argumentative. We might say there's three negatives really that Proverbs speaks of. You know, the unfaithful wife, the seductive woman, and the argumentative woman. But how many positives does it paint?
16.
At least in one chapter.
Yeah.
In this, and we counted how many?
4 or something?
I counted 9 last time.
Oh, right.
So 16 and 9 is 25. So it paints at least 25 positive portraits of a woman. And realistically, you know, if we look at the overlap, only about 3 negatives. So would you say that overall, Proverbs paints a positive image of women or a negative one? Overwhelmingly positive, right? Now, here's the interesting part. We go on to page, and I guess those are the questions we already asked. What issues or struggles does Proverbs present to women? And what specific strengths or virtues and I think we've done that already. What's missing in Proverbs is this, or not missing, but what's absent in Proverbs is this. Does it anywhere in Proverbs say that women are to be submissive to men? No, it actually never says that part. Does it ever speak of women in a subordinate, especially in this chapter, in a subordinate role? She's actually, you know, she's a very complimentary role to him. And I put the note here, a virtuous wife brings honor on her husband by her industry, wisdom, and a relationship with God. Now, here's the contrast. So, because both Joyce and Donna alluded to this, like we often think of women in that culture being negative. And you're right, because I want us to look at 3 passages from other writings, 2 from the time period and 1 from Solomon, that paint a very different portrait, and then contrast the portrait we just saw in Proverbs with the portrait of the culture around. And we're going to see, well, you already know where I'm heading. We're going to see a contrasting portrait. All right, these first 2 are from the book of Sirach, and Sirach wrote what's called the Wisdom of Sirach, and it's included in the, what's it called? The extracurricular books of the Bible, non-canonical, the books that we don't have, but it was from the same time period. So we're going to read these 2 passages and then 1. And while I'm reading them, start putting check marks, plus or negative. I didn't put a little score sheet below them, but you can so you keep score while I read slowly. All right. All wickedness is but little compared to the wickedness of women. Let the portion of a sinner fall upon her. As the climbing up a sandy way is to the feet of the aged, so is a wife full of words to a quiet man. Stumble not at the beauty of a woman, and desire her not for pleasure. A woman, if she is maintained by her husband is full of anger, impudence, and much reproach. A wicked woman abateth the courage, or takes your courage away, makes a heavy countenance and a wounded heart. A woman that will not comfort her husband in distress maketh weak hands and feeble knees. Of the woman came the beginning of sin, and through her we all die. Yikes. So how many negatives did you count in that one? I lost track.
7 or 8.
At least, yeah. So what would you say is the wisdom of Yeshua ben Sira so far? What's his general attitude towards women?
Well,
To where he gets,
they must have had issues with women because that's like they spend so much time on this.
yeah, well, women and men have lots of time
Yeah.
to talk about each other.
Yeah.
All right, let's read up Sirach 42, 12 through 14. Do not look upon anyone for beauty, and do not sit in the midst of women. For from garments come the moth, and from a woman comes woman's wickedness. Better is the wickedness of a man than a woman who does good.
What?
And it is a woman who brings shame and disgrace.
Yeah. This dude does not like women.
This dude has had some trouble with women in the past. Yeah, some serious issues here.
No.
All right. And this is from Ecclesiastes. Now we're stuck because in Sirach we can kind of brush off as the words of man, but this is, look, says the teacher. This is what I've discovered. Adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things. While I was still searching, but not founding, I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. Remember, we said Proverbs is the way things should be, and Ecclesiastes is
Things are.
some things are. Yeah. In other words, if we look at these things, the culture of the day, what was the general attitude of men towards women, at least in these specific examples? Not very good, right? Very negative. So if we examine some of the cultural and expectations or experiences of men with women, it doesn't come across pretty positive. But what does Scripture do in contrast? It paints a wonderful picture of women, right? A very empowering picture. The portrait of women in Proverbs 31 is the portrait of women, that we would paint today. Empowered, strong, hardworking, bringing honor and glory to their family, to their communities, all these things, right? Where the portrait of the culture was far more negative. Now we have to understand that the culture of the day was very communal. Today we're very much about individuals, the rights of the individual, you as an individual have your own identity. But back then, and like some cultures today, it's a very collectivist culture, right? And so we know this from watching the news or hearing stories about shame-based cultures, where an individual's actions are reflected on the entire culture. So today, if you do an act, you're responsible for your own actions, right? And you can separate that. In these collectivist cultures, an individual's behavior it permeates the culture. And so if the wife was to bring shame upon herself, what was she going to bring shame upon? The man, the husband, her family, her relatives. Her actions would shame the entire community or the entire family. So what does Proverbs really want women to be?
Chapter 31.
Yeah, chapter 31, exactly. Morally excellent. Because the morally excellent woman will do what to her family? Will bring honor to her family. So now we're talking about an honor-based culture and a shame-based culture, right? Very different than the culture we have today, which is very individualistic. So, a woman's behavior reflected the honor or the shame of her family. So what's he saying to women? Don't bring shame on your family. Now, has he said the same thing to men? Absolutely, to his son, right? Don't honor your father and mother. Be wise. He's saying to his son, don't bring shame upon your family. So he's applying the same measuring stick. He's saying, recognize that, be careful, because women can bring, don't be a woman who brings shame. An adulterous and quarrelsome woman will bring shame to her family, but so will a foolish son. So he's talking in the context of a collectivist culture versus the individualistic culture that we were. The note I just wrote this afternoon is Proverbs reflect a woman's role in the culture, calling women to bring honor to their husbands and family. And that's really what it wants. That's why the quarrelsome woman is such a problem, because it brings shame. And how much more so with the adulteress or the wayward wife? You know, we see this in the news. We'll see honor killings, you know, the betrayal and you know, these vile things that happen. When a woman is caught in adultery, you know, they don't kill the guy.
Right.
What do? They kill the woman because she has brought shame to the family, right? Which is so twisted, you know. Why would you punish her rather than because she has brought shame to the family? So we have to see this portrait in the light of the culture, the society around them. Yeah. All right, this is kind of some observations before we kind of get to where I want to go with this tonight. Proverbs is not a recipe for a revolution. You notice that Proverbs doesn't overthrow the pile. Rather a guidebook for how to function within society as it presents itself. So it's guiding women in a collectivist society how to behave so as to not bring shame, or how to behave so as to bring honor, right? Proverbs is not a revolution, but a guide to relationships within the culture. And within that culture, women do well when they bring honor to their husbands. And that's what he's guiding us. Got a thought there? No. Okay. It's interesting. It never calls for the poor to revolt, but to live with integrity in their situation. Proverbs 16:19. Better to be lowly in spirit along with the oppressed than share plunder with the proud.
Yeah.
Right. You know, it's calling us how to live nobly within our circumstance, right? And the summary I put is that Proverbs calls both men and women to be people of virtue. So here's the question of the hour that I want to get this to land on. Are these passages that we read about the contentious woman and the adulterous woman and the seductive woman and all these negative ones, are they simply a description, especially the ones in Sirach and Ecclesiastes, are they simply a description of the world in which these people found themselves, or are these passages considered instructions on how to behave? Is Proverbs a description of the world that Solomon saw and said, this is the world, especially Ecclesiastes, right? Or is Proverbs to be a guidebook for behavior? What do you think?
Ask that again.
Is Proverbs simply, especially Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, no, we didn't read Ecclesiastes, we'll do Ecclesiastes this fall. Is Proverbs a guidebook for how to behave or a description of behavior? Is it saying, this is how you should behave? Or is it, this is how people behave?
No, it's definitely guidebook.
Yeah, it elevates it, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Proverbs wants us, it's not simply of this, how you behave. It's actually,
People don't behave that way.
and that's exactly it, because people behave like Ecclesiastes, which we're going to see. He wants us to behave like Proverbs. So Proverbs becomes what life is like, which brings us to the issue I thought we'd wrestle with a little bit this evening. We've been almost 50 minutes already. Wow. There are passages in Scripture. Some of them are descriptive. We call those, they're descriptive passages, and some passages are prescriptive. They're a prescription, and some passages are simply a description. So can you think of a passage that's a description of how people behave that you would not want people to behave like? Describes, it's writing a story and says this is how someone behaves, but you wouldn't want everybody to behave like that. You certainly wouldn't want to prescribe that kind of behavior.
Mhm.
Remember the story of Elisha, who comes up, he's received the mantle from Elijah, and he comes out and the children make fun of him,
Yes.
and they call him old bald one. And what does he do? Remember that story? Yeah, he curses them and a bear comes out and kills the children, right? Now, is that prescription? If we say, oh, Harlan, you bald one, and Harlan says, curse you, and then a bear walks into the sanctuary and kills me, that's a bit of a rough go. Yeah. It won't happen. So, that's a good example of a descriptive passage. We're not supposed to curse people who make fun of us, are we? You couldn't say, well, based on that passage, if anybody makes fun of you, you should curse them. No, we wouldn't choose that, right? We would say, that's not a prescription. That describes what happens, right? There's a passage in Acts where Herod is speaking, and someone says, it's not the voice of a man, but the voice of a God. Is that, no, that's not true, right? So Acts is describing a situation, but it's not saying that we should honor people and say these people are gods among us, right?
Yeah.
So can you think of other passages that are just descriptive passages, not prescriptive? Then we'll get into the prescriptive ones in a second. So eliminate. Yeah. All right, let's maybe the second half of the question is easier then. What passages would you see as prescriptions?
Like the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. All of Jesus' teachings.
Yeah,
Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That's not just a description of the nice guy. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody did that? Or the Good Samaritan.
Right.
Is the story of the Good Samaritan just a description of a decent human being, or is it a prescription of how we're supposed to treat our neighbor?
Scripture.
Absolutely. It's Jesus got the pad out and says, this is how you treat people, right? What's the danger of saying, of taking those prescriptive passages and saying, oh, they're just descriptive passages?
there's no reason or the onus isn't really on us anymore.
Sure.
It's just a nice story that,
Mhm.
It's just a nice story.
For somebody.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe not. It guts them of their power, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like if the doctor gave you a prescription and he said, take it, that's just a description of my cholesterol problem. It guts it of its power. You go, no, that's actually, I have to take that to be better.
Yeah, I have to do something about it.
I have to do something. That's right. The minute it's descriptive, I no longer have to do anything about it. I'm no longer responsible for my behavior or responsible for my actions, right? Now, it gets tricky because there are some passages in Scripture where we have to make that call. And I've got 4 in front of us there. The fun one is David and Goliath. Are we supposed to kill giants every time we see them? No. We would say no. That's just a descriptive passage, and that's why those are tough to preach on. Because how do you find the prescription
Mhm.
from the description? So people will talk about facing the giants in your life. They'll make a prescription out of the description. Okay, but here's one. This is in Acts. Oh man, I don't have the chapter. I just have the verses here. From Acts, it says, when some were becoming hardened and disobedient, speaking evil of the way, Jesus' people, before the people, Paul withdrew from them and took away the disciples, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus. This took place for 2 years, so that all who lived in Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. So Paul's having contention with the Jews, and what does he do? He rents a school, or he goes to a school, and he has church in a school. Right. So does that mean that we should rent schools to have churches? No, it's just a description, right? And Acts is the tricky one because Acts contains a lot of descriptions of it. But are the descriptions in Acts prescriptions for behavior? Preaching through Acts is really tricky because that line between descriptive and prescriptive is, what's a good word? Blurred. Yeah. Challenging. We get into Acts 2, we get into all these passages later on, and the call between descriptive and prescriptive gets, when Sherry did her master's, she wrote her master's on responsible reading in the book of Acts. And her whole master's was on how do we do this? How do we read Acts carefully and responsibly? Because we can read Acts very irresponsibly. Right? And you've probably encountered people who've read Acts and said, yep, that's a prescription. This is how the church should behave based on that verse, bang, bang, bang. And they jump into the prescription when it may well be a prescription. And so this idea isn't just, a fun mental exercise. It's actually quite important because we have to decide which passages in Scripture are truly a prescription for how the church is to behave and which ones are the description of the history of the church, just like David and Goliath is a history. 2 Corinthians 13:12 says, so Myrtle, what do you think? COVID. We can't even greet with a holy handshake anymore. Yeah, the holy elbow. Yeah. So, it says this a couple of times in Scripture. I just picked one. So is that descriptive or prescriptive?
I think it's descriptive.
It's descriptive.
Culturally, maybe, hey?
Good. So how do you make that call? It's right there. It's a command.
Because we don't do that anyway.
Because we don't do it otherwise. Yeah, it would seem foreign and strange, right? So
There are culture stuff still do that.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, very, yeah, exactly.
Yes, that is their culture.
And within that culture, that wouldn't be seen as anything uncomfortable. You'd grow up with it, you'd be very familiar with it, right? But if we started doing that, people might come to church or they might not, depends, they might want to come more often. Uh,
You know, IGA and greet them with a kiss.
You might put hand sanitizer on your lips before you do that. Wait. So also we start saying, oh, there's some cultural factors in here as well, right? And we start shedding a bit of cultural light, saying sometimes we have to read scripture in the light of the culture.
Right.
Yeah.
It just means greet them friendly.
Yeah, yes, right, warmly, right?
Warmly,
Yeah. And so now we kind of take the spirit of the text out of it. We say what they're saying is be hospitable, greet each other. Yeah. So now we say, well, that's more of a descriptive and where there's a principle at work here rather than an actual command in the passage. Do you see where where it gets tricky? And you see how we all do it, right? Here, 1 Corinthians 11:5. But everyone who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered honors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved. We had this discussion here a little while back when Joni was here, right?
Yeah.
So now we get into head coverings. And then the last one I didn't put a reference in because I don't know if we need it, but was foot washing when Jesus washed the disciples' feet, right? Now, if you've been to a Mennonite church growing up that way, did you have foot washing growing up, Myrtle? And some churches do to this day. They'll have foot washing evenings, right? So I think you'll see the challenges that lay in reading. And whenever we read scripture, we have a little filter in our brain. We read it, say, okay, and we almost have, like I had with the positive and the negatives, we create two columns. We say, okay, that's a prescription and that's a description. And we do it all the time when we read scripture. What's the danger of doing it though?
Do whatever you want it to do.
Sure. Yeah, you can be dismissive, right?
Yeah.
You could say, well, that just describes how you're supposed to behave. That's actually not how I'm supposed to behave.
So we
Right?
don't own it then.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. It frees us from the responsibility of ownership. Yeah. So how do we make those decisions as a church, as a community? How do we make that call? I don't have an answer for that one tonight, but maybe food for thought. Yeah. Because we are people, we commit ourselves to the word, right? We submit ourselves to the authority of what God has spoken and revealed to us, and we want to be in obedience. When God makes the prescription, we want to follow it because we know it's for the good of ourselves, right? But the risk is that we start to bring not only their culture, we'll also start to bring our culture into it and say, well, within our culture, these things are permissive. And
We
we,
have to take the context of the scripture too. You can't just take one verse and say,
Yeah.
and that's what I've done here, haven't I? Yeah, exactly, Merlin. We have to, and you see notes early on, it says context is king. The context of all what's happening in the culture, the context of who's writing it and how they're writing it, and then our own context as we receive it. There's a wonderful book called Reading the Bible with the Damned, and it's about a prison chaplain. And he writes how prisoners read the text versus how you and I might read the text. And one of his statements is, that we here in North America, we're always the hero in the story. We're always David. We're not Goliath. But sometimes we're Goliath. We want to read ourselves as the good Samaritan, not as the Pharisee who walks away. We're the hero in the story. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of narcissism. Narcissism is when you think about yourself all the time. Every time you walk by a mirror, it's very self-absorbed. And there's a phrase now out there, it's called narcigesis. That is, when you read yourself into the text, you're always the hero of every story. You're always the good Samaritan. You're always David. You're always the hero. Instead of going, there are times that this, and sometimes the story isn't about me at all. I'm just kind of a witness to it. So sometimes these things are prescriptive. And I think as we read Proverbs is a prescription for how we are to be wise. It's not simply a description of the wise person. It's a call for you and I to be that very wise person. Because we could read Proverbs and say, well, yeah, that describes a wise person, but I'm not, I don't have to be that way, right? I don't have to fear the Lord. But the opposite is true. Proverbs, I believe, is the call for us to live in accordance with wisdom and righteousness and these great prescriptions for how we are to live then as God's people. When we get to Ecclesiastes, then we get to a very interesting difference because there's a lot of descriptive passages in there. So this is why we have to understand this tool before we jump into this book that we'll pick up. So, all right, it's just been over an hour. Here's a little bit of what's going to happen. This is our last Bible study online. And for July and August, and probably late August, somewhere then we'll pick up again. I'll put up a video on this YouTube channel so you can jump back with us again, and I'll put up a notice on Facebook so you can jump back with us again if you're interested as we move from Proverbs, which is a description of the way life should be, to Ecclesiastes, which is the way life is. So this summer, I encourage all of us and all of you to take time and read Ecclesiastes. And start jotting down some questions and some observations about that rather unusual book. It's an interesting read. So, all right. Thank you to everyone who's rejoined us, and thank you to everyone who's been faithful for joining us as we take a little summer break. As we will continue though here with prayer meeting, but obviously we won't be. What time do you want, Myrtle? You tell me.
Oh, I don't know.
7?
7?
Sure.
Yeah.
Prayer meeting at 7 o'clock here then. And then we'll pray, read some scripture together, but we won't be having kind of a formalized study. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. It has been fun. I hope you've enjoyed it. Well, more than enjoyed it. Hope you benefit.